Nobody's born incredible. People who do incredible things simply took the right steps. This is our journey. This is the hunt for incredible. In this episode, we chat with Mike Mulvey. Mike is the creative director of a software agency out of the Bay Area and former designer at Apple. He currently oversees the visual and experiential design elements for software products, as well as advises on brand creation for startups and various product offerings. Brand is one of the most critical and important elements of any product offering in business. So we spent a lot of time there and it was a ton of fun. In this episode, we talk about how he got into design to make it a lucrative career, which unfortunately is really challenging for a lot of other artists, but Mike did it incredibly well. And we also talk about how he was shaped through the structure and discipline of his training, which I think is really important because that often gets missed by people who are in an artistic field. The rigid structure and discipline of developing yourself in that field is highly important. So it was a lot of fun to touch on that too. All right. Without further ado, here's my great conversation with Mike Mulvey. All right, today we have a very special guest, Mike Mulvey. He's a designer that I've worked closely with. He's an incredible designer who's an expert in branding, visual design, and all sorts of really great things around how to shape the image of a business. So I'm super stoked to chat with him. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. This is great. I'm honored that I'm worthy of this show. So yeah.
Oh man, you're
really
more
excited
than
to start talking to you.
Awesome. So to kick things off, what is some of your background in terms of how you actually got into design?
How I got into design. I got into design, strangely enough, back in high school. I always thought people in my industry, designers, always, they went to school for that. They were trained in that. And I found that I thought people that studied other things and moved into design were the anomaly. And then it seems like the older I get, I'm the anomaly. So I got into art as a young kid in like grade school. Then I got into high school in New Jersey. I was lucky enough to have a graphic design course in high school, which I realized in a public school was kind of a unique experience. So we learned lettering and things like that, analog design things. And then I had a friend who in a grade younger than me that had taken a pre-college program at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And he came back, he did this program over the summer and he came back with all these nude sketches and design stuff and all this stuff he did it like at a college. And I said, well, I want to do that. So another friend of mine and I decided to take that pre-college program, take college level courses in high school over the summer for like 3 months in Brooklyn. And yeah, and that was my first taste in design. And then, when you're a kid, you don't really know, you say you want to be something, you're not sure, you don't really know what that thing is. So I applied to Rutgers and to Pratt because they both had design programs. And my grades in high school were really crappy. So when I applied to Rutgers in New Jersey, I got waitlisted. So I went to a portfolio review. My portfolio got really high marks, but my grades, I didn't break 1,000 on the SATs. I graduated high school with a 2.7. So Rutgers was like, yeah, you're not, we're going to waitlist you. But then I got a letter in the mail saying, sorry, but you haven't been accepted. So I was like, all right, I'm going to Pratt. And my dad was ready to take out a loan so that he could afford to pay for an out-of-state school that was twice as much as Rutgers. And then after I got accepted to Pratt, after I got rejected from Rutgers followed up from another program at another campus in Newark, New Jersey, in the inner city, saying, we have a design program here in Newark. You should consider it instead of Pratt. And since my dad was paying for college, he said, yeah, you're going to Rutgers. So I literally got pulled out of the trash and was given a second chance by this guy who ended up being one of my mentors. His name was Frank Stolfo. And that was like the start of like my hardcore training in graphic design and critiques. And I was classically trained. I had a BFA program, and between Frank Stolfo and my other professor, Ned Drew, who I still keep in touch with, they were the ones that really kind of whipped us into shape, made us battle-tested design students that were ready to kind of go into the world as designers. But that was sort of like my start in the design in design. So Yeah.
You've told me in previous conversations around some of the battle testing, the preparing and the hardening and shaping. Can you share some of
Yeah.
those stories?
Yeah. It's always funny because we romanticize the older we get, you look back at things and you kind of exaggerate and you romanticize them. And but yeah, design school, it was not easy for, I mean, a lot of people didn't realize how hard it is to be a designer, because the standards of my professors were really high. So I probably told you this story where I remember one time we had a critique. We were supposed to bring in sketches of logos or designs, like hand-drawn sketches. And my professor had asked for like, let's say 20 sketches. So we were supposed to pin up all of our stuff on the wall. And our Professor Ned, he looked at everyone's work and he said, "Whose is this?" And it was this girl in our class. She said, "That's mine." He's like, "I only see like 10 sketches here. I don't see 20 sketches." He's like, "I need you to leave the class. I need you to get the hell out." And she kept, and she was really, what made me angry about it was that she was naturally talented. Like she was better than me. She was better than a lot of people in the class, but she didn't apply herself. And he says, "No, you're wasting everyone's time here. I need you to get out now and come back tomorrow when you have what I asked for." And she started crying and she was trying to defend herself. She made it worse than it should have been. She should have just said, "I'm sorry," and left. But so those were like, there was like, I started design school at Rutgers with 25, there was 25 people in my class. I graduated with 9. So over half of the people that were in the program quit. So yeah, so it was a real, like, it was hardcore, but if you were enjoying it, like you got rewarded for that, so to speak. Like it wasn't like, oh, it wasn't like they were making, deliberately trying to, hurt people's feelings and stuff. They were just trying, they had a certain, like, I watched Kitchen Nightmares and Gordon Ramsay and how hard, how crazy he can be. It was sort of like that, not that extreme, but it was like, this is we're not playing around. We're not just drawing stuff. This is graphic design, and there's theory, and there's things to read, and you have to have, a steady hand, and there were a lot of standards to be met. So by the time we graduated and got into the real world, it was like, it wasn't that daunting. When you talk about getting client feedback and, oh, they were like, my client's so hardcore. It's like, well, I just graduated this program and there's not much you can do to me to like make me upset, because they've already sort of, it was like boot camp, right? In the Army. It was like, all right, yeah. So I look back at that education, and I'm very grateful that I had them as professors.
Yeah. There's also something magical that happens when you apply structure and pressure to an artistic field. So
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of artists who they follow their heart and their passion, and that makes sense because that's what's pulling them into that artistic field. But they lack the structure, and so they have a hard time excelling. But when you have that structure and rigor of a professor who's serious about honing a craft and skill, magic happens. It's like Michelangelo was known for being obsessive about his craft and actually practicing regularly on marble obsessively to make sure that he was getting the shapes he wanted and the feeling that he was getting. And Metallica's
Yeah.
drummer is another example. I mean, he is the drummer of a massive band, making insane amounts of money, incredibly successful. And even he wanted to level up. And once he got a coach, noticed a profound acceleration in his development that made him from a peak performer from amongst his peers to a world-class performer, taking it to the next level.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've noticed too, is so I'd love to, not to skip in the story, but you ended up working at
Yeah.
Apple. Now you're the director of design at Griot. I've
Mhm.
seen you, even the way you coach people under you to improve their design, is providing that structured feedback and making sure that they have rigor in terms of how they think about it, and watching the people around you develop has also been really incredible to see.
Cool. I appreciate that. No, and that's also too, yeah, like it's also important, I've found, for designers, junior designers, but like non-designers too, that we're working with, is teaching people how to critique properly, right? Like this isn't like a Don Draper situation where I don't like this, Mike doesn't like this, so redo it. It's you have to take it out of the realm of like the subjective and say objectively, Gideon, this isn't working because it doesn't have the brand colors of, the Hunt for Incredible. It doesn't have the right brand voice. We need to redo it because it's not objectively, it's not meeting the requirements of the project. So, because a lot of times, I think we've all been in situations where somebody says, I don't like this design. And it's like, well, that's not, you're allowed your opinion, but as a designer, what I need to find out is what's not working, right? So then it takes it out of the realm of like Mike's picking on this. It's more about like, no, we're not, there's things that we need to do to make this successful, and it has nothing to do with what Mike thinks. It's about, we need to fix these things on the project. So yeah, like there's this element of like training people, having people understand how to critique properly. That's something I got in school too. It wasn't that our professors were like, oh, I don't like this or I don't like that. It's like they were objectively critiquing things and saying this isn't working or that's not working and this is why. Yeah.
So you go through your collegiate career developing yourself. How did you end up positioning yourself and launching into your career? Because you are, I would assume it's the minority of designers that actually turn their craft into a successful career financially, and you've done excellently with that. How did you think about positioning yourself to actually excel with your career and delivering value to people?
Well, so an interesting thing happened. I studied graphic design in college, and that has to do with presentation, with typography, with form and content, logos, letterhead, business cards, things people don't use anymore. Had nothing to do with web design, product design, software design, all the things that I do now, in pixels on a screen. So when I was graduating, I graduated late. I took 4.5 years to graduate Rutgers because I failed a few philosophy classes. But when I was graduating, like 99, 2000, the web was really starting, the original like web bubble was emerging, and I was immediately attracted to it. I was like, what is all this interactive design, animation? There was this program called Flash that let designers sort of create interactive websites and animations and things. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I remember mentally making the switch in my head. And I said, I'm not going to do CMYK anymore. I'm going to do RGB, meaning I'm not going to do stuff that's printed in ink on paper and things like that. I'm going to do stuff that's on a screen, because for whether I was right or wrong, I just thought I couldn't do both. I couldn't be awesome at print design and digital design at the same time. Some people might argue you could have done both, but for me, I just wanted to focus on one thing. So I immediately got into web design. One of the benefits of hustling in college, in my design program, is professors, and I found this out later when I started teaching design at Rutgers and FIT, is that it really gets you excited as a professor when you see students that come up to you after class and are like asking questions, because you're like, oh, this is like a young Jedi that they're interested in what I'm interested in. Like I can train them and make them better and see them succeed. So when I was graduating, my professor asked me, he said, you know HTML, right? And I lied. I said, yeah, I know HTML. And he said, well, I got somebody in New York City that I work with at Cooper Union. Her husband has a design firm down in Soho. Would you want to interview there? And I was like, yeah. So I interviewed at this place, and this guy, his name's Dan Miller. He's still around. My one of my friends from Rutgers is still working for him 24 years later. So I interviewed with him. He hired me. He gave me a little trial period, paid me freelance. I built my first website I built was for a film called Shadowboxers. Have you ever seen the movie $1 Million Baby?
I haven't. I've seen
Okay.
I've seen the trailer though. I know what you're talking about.
So Clint Eastwood. So like the bad woman boxer that paralyzes. I forget her. I'm drawing a blank on the actress right now, but that bad woman boxer. It was the female heavyweight champ in real life. Her name is Lucia Riker. And anyway, so the website I did was for this documentary about the women's heavyweight champ of boxing in Europe. And once I did that website, Dan decided, all right, I'm going to hire you. You're legit. So I tell that story to to people that I manage and stuff, or, even students, is that I don't encourage lying, but if you have the confidence that you like to pull something off, I always say, just go for it. So like, my intentions weren't malicious in my lying. It was just, I thought I'd started taking tutorials online and learning about web design. So I just sort of lied and said, yeah, I know HTML. And then he asked me if I knew Flash, and I said, yeah, I know Flash. And back then software came with manuals. So I just grabbed the Flash manual, started reading it, made a few things. I said, yeah, I know Flash now. So, and that's always been my MO in my career, is that I think curiosity is a really important thing to have in your career, because if you're not curious, you're not going to learn new things. And in the industry that we're in with software and applications and product design, everything's constantly evolving. So you have to be ready to, like, what's the new thing? Let's try this out. There's a new software, the social media platform. Let's try this platform. Let's try this design tool. So I've always, and then, I'm always sort of figuring out, like, learning what are the new things that I need to know.
There are a few really, really great things to tease out there. One is your comment on being the best, saying, okay, I can do print or I can do digital, but I need to choose one to be the best. Too often, especially with people who follow their passions and their interests, if they are interested in a diverse set of things, then they'll spread themselves thin and never be the best at anything. And to identify, okay, I need to pick one thing and be very intentional about it to become the best is also, I'm sure, a major reason as to why you are phenomenal. You are by far the best visual and graphics designer I have ever worked with in my entire life. I remember the first few meetings with you where I was like, dude, I need to become friends with this guy because he is a peak performer, period. And it's evident in your work and in the questions that you ask and the detail that you ask them, which I have a few questions around later on. So your intentionality around being the best and not spreading yourself thin is fantastic. The other is noticing trends. So you notice the trends going on in the digital space and you said, okay, I see there being a shift. How can I pursue it? And I've heard you even bring up similar conversations around AI, right? It's like, okay, AI is beginning to do a lot of design work. How can we leverage this as a tool to ride the front of the wave? Right. So you have been, you were one of the first people that I knew who was diving into Mid-Journey and exploring that and seeing how it would work with design, noticing those trends. The third thing that I want to point out is your gusto in saying, yeah, I know that. I know HTML, or at least I can figure it out by the time I need to know it. Yeah. That is a pattern that you see across so many successful people who, when they're asked if they can do something, they say yes, and then they figure out immediately how to do that. One of the things that got me into tech was actually a career as a customer centricity analyst for a software product that this enterprise I was working at was building. And there was a job application for a customer centricity analyst. And I had a brief conversation with somebody about it. And they said, oh, do you understand customer centricity? And I was like, yeah, I understand customer centricity, because in my mind, I was like, oh, the customer's at the center seems pretty intuitive. I immediately afterwards bought 3 books on customer centricity. One of them I read through 2 times by the time the actual interview came for the job. And I was nailing every single point from the book that I wrote from the guy who developed the concept of customer centricity. And I ended up getting the job because I got teed up properly with, like, oh, I can figure it out by the time I actually get there. And what people often miss is that there's a window of opportunity for you to seize. And if you miss that window, then you might not get the opportunity again. So jump through the window and then figure out how to land once you're out.
Yeah. I have to say too, that growing up, like, sometimes you get lucky with the skill sets you have. Like, I can't take credit for, like, my dad's an engineer, and I grew up, fixing my car. He used to send me to the junkyard whenever something broke on my car. He wouldn't pay for it. If I wanted a new stereo in my car, he would show me how we would install it and, check check if the speakers are in phase or if they're out of phase. And I didn't know what that meant. He would show me. So I grew up with this tinkering mentality, like not being afraid of technology. Like, my dad would take things apart, and actually, unlike like the stereotype joke, like, he'd actually put it back together. Like, our first television growing up was built out of this thing called, you'll have to look it up, anyone who's watching this or listening right now. It's called Heathkit. So Heath kits were like, you could build a radio or a television. So our first television and our first home component stereo system, my dad built. We had this, he had his workshop in the basement where he would solder things and fix things. And there would be table saws and voltmeters and all these things. So I kind of grew up with this mentality of like, well, let's just figure it out. So I was lucky in that respect where I was a creative person artistically, but I had this technical knack for things. So I was on a computer since I was 4 years old, before Windows, before like just using DOS to install sound cards and things like that. So I was primed at an early age to just be good with technology. So that definitely helped me in my digital design career, figuring out software, because I saw most of the people, my classmates, not make that jump to digital. And you can make a living as a print designer, but it wasn't, or it's still not as lucrative as it is to do digital. So and as far as being the best, I appreciate your comments, but I have to say I'm based on all the people I've worked with, all the other designers I've worked with in my career, I'm always around people that are way more like talented than me. So a lot of times it's like, oh, I'm going to steal their idea. Or, oh, that's a cool, let me take their Photoshop file and see how they design that. And so being in New York City at the beginning of my career helped, because the great thing about New York City at the time for me was that everyone's better than you. Everyone has more money than you. They're better looking than you. They're more talented than you, whatever it is. Right. So like, you're always around, like I felt like I was always around these rock star designers that I'm like, wow, like I'm learning a lot. Like it wasn't intimidating. Sometimes it was, but it was more like, this is so cool that I get to like, because then they level you up, right? Because they're operating at this level, and you're like, well, I can't get to that level, but I can get like kind of close. So that helped a lot. So it's like, yeah, that technical aspect, having my dad's technical chops and stuff, or a fraction of his chops, and then being around other more talented people, that helped a lot too.
Who you surround yourself with is so critically important. I always say, if you want to go to the Olympics, hang around Olympians. Don't listen to your Uncle Bob who watches the Olympics every 4 years. You really have to dive in deep and surround yourself with people who are far more skilled than you. It's like that one of my favorite quotes, show me your friends and I will show you your future. Like, who are you surrounding yourself with that's actually defining who you are becoming?
Yeah. Or like it's got sort of like if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. It's like it's kind of thing too. And like if everyone's sort of like, oh, you're such a good designer, you should be somebody else, and like you should somebody else that they're saying that. I mean, it feels good when people say that, but yeah, that's always been a fun part for me, is like positive competition, right? Where you're like, we would do a lot of things in my career where I had one creative director who used to have us do shootouts, where we'd have we did this for Air National Guard. We had an Air National Guard project come in at this agency I worked at, and our creative director decided three of our art directors everybody do their own version, and we're going to do a shootout and decide, and we're going to pitch those to the client, and whoever's wins, everyone else bands behind that person's and supports their direction. So if Gideon's design wins, like the client approves that one, then we're going to scrap what we did and we're going to help support you. So it's like,
I love that.
It's fun. It's fun. You get bummed if your direction doesn't get picked, but at the end of the day, you're still doing design. So
yeah. And having the boldness too, something I'd like to circle back around to, is having the boldness to be willing to put out designs and then scrap them. I've noticed another important characteristic about you is you will very quickly trash an idea. Like, you'll create a bunch of variations of something, and then based on the client's feedback, you'll scrap whatever they're not interested in and just move forward, as opposed to getting super emotionally tied to whatever you did design and not being able to give it up. And I think your ability to so quickly cut bad designs and just move forward, even if you liked it in that moment, but just being willing to scrap it, makes you such a quick and effective designer.
Yeah, that's something that comes with time. it wasn't always like that. And I've seen this in the past with when I've managed younger designers that are at the beginning of their career, because a lot of times at the beginning of your career, your work is an extension of you. So if you don't like my design, you don't like me. And I've been there, so I understand that mentality. But once you realize that that's not you, that's just something you made and it's separate, and you can be, again, objective and just like critique it objectively. And if the client says something they don't like about it, or a colleague, that they're not attacking you. Once you can make that mental switch, it makes things a lot easier. And then and yeah, the thing about iterating, you've seen some of my design files where we rarely, most of the designs you make or I make a lot of times are shit until you iterate and you finally get one that works. So that fear of like, well, even the one that is working got shot down. All right, we got to keep iterating. Again, it's like that muscle memory of design school where it's like, okay, we'll come up with generate some more ideas. Like, I saw this great, I wrote it down because this video popped up on Instagram of it was an interview Jerry Seinfeld did with Howard Stern. And Howard's like, how do you do this over and over again? You're writing jokes like all day, every day on like these yellow legal pads. And Jerry said, I wrote it down. He said, your blessing in life is when you find the torture in life you're comfortable with. And I was like, yeah. I said, that's it. Because I'm not going to say that like being a designer is always awesome and every client is perfect, but like it's the torture that I'm comfortable with that I'm willing to be like, all right, let's keep doing it.
Yeah. Wow.
It's like, well, and yeah, and like we've talked about running before. That's another torture that I'm comfortable with. Like I live in Miami now. I hate running here, but it's a torture I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, that resonates so deeply with me because I think I brought this up on other episodes. I've had people who are close to me comment so many times, bro, you are a workaholic. Like you need to learn to like relax and take time off. Because even when I relax, my mind is still going creatively about like, oh, how can we like develop the podcast or how can I make it better, this and that.
Right.
And to me, it's pure joy to think about those things. Like if you saw a musician at a party playing guitar in the corner of the room, you wouldn't think, oh my gosh, that person's a workaholic. You'd think, wow, that person really loves their craft. They're so obsessed and just bathing in the music and the idea of what they can create next. And I mean, humans are naturally creative creatures. So I've always viewed myself more as an artist whose canvas is business, more so than just a logical business grinder. Like when we were over in Italy, we were on a boat along the Amalfi Coast, and I was soaking in the experience and just getting carried away with more thoughts about the podcast or the content, but in such a positive way.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my wife, Jackie, about it, and she was like, you are out of your mind. You literally cannot turn it off. And I'm like, this is, to your quote's point, a torture that I'm comfortable with. Like, I can't turn it off. And if I had the option, I don't know that I would, because I enjoy the process of the creation of it so much.
Yeah. I'm the same way. And I'm also not a sit on the beach. Like that's not a vacation for me. Like I can do it for a little bit, but like I think it's my ADD and just my restlessness, like you, where it's like I need to be doing stuff. But like you also bring up a good point too, which is like a lot of times there's things in our culture that people will apply a negative label to, like Gideon's he's a podcasting fanatic, right? Like a fanatic meaning like it's a negative thing, right? Or he's a running fanatic, right? As opposed to like fanaticism being a good thing. Obviously there are activities that are bad to get into, that if you are a fanatic in them, they're not good. But like, so a lot of times people will just use that label negatively. And it's like, well, it's not, if it's what they're like, he's a golf fanatic. It's like, well, why are you saying that like it's a negative thing, right? I don't know.
Yeah, like if it's something that you enjoy so deeply that you welcome it consuming you, and you lean into it, is there a problem with that?
Yeah. Oh, he's a golf fanatic. He has to give the right beans, and he has to have his temperature of he's a fanatic. He's obsessed with it. It's like, well, let him be obsessed with it.
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't know.
100%. I mean, I can see if it gets to the point of, okay, it's unhealthy. Maybe
Right.
Gideon's
Yeah.
working so hard, his stress levels are so high, he hasn't slept in days, he
Right.
needs to relax. Then it's something to be mindful of. Or if it's
Exactly.
damaging relationships, like your family, you have kids that you never see because you're carried away.
Yeah.
But with all those things, it's like if there is a balance there and there's a joy that comes from it, then where is the problem? And how is that managed?
Right.
Yeah, like the other day I was talking to somebody, and it was actually a group. We were on a call, and we went around and shared a win, a business win and a life win. So it's like, what have you done over the last week that was in your life that's been a win? And what did you do in your business that was a win? And I couldn't distinguish between the two. I was like, my life and my business are so, in my view, beautifully woven together that like my business wins are my life wins because this is my craft that I'm fully saturated within.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to distinguish it. So I just gave two business life wins for me.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that that Chris Rock special? It was from I have no sense of time anymore. I don't know if it was 5 years ago or 10. It was probably closer to 10 years ago. He talks about the difference between a career and a job. He's like, some of you have careers and some of you have jobs. If for the people that have careers, you need to shut the hell up in front of people that have jobs because they don't care about your career, right? And then he was basically, it's really funny, and I'm not going to try to do Chris Rock right now, but he says, like, with a job there's too much time, and with a career there's not enough time because you have your projects. And it's, that's true, right? It's like you have your, when you have a career, you don't look at it as like, oh, I gotta clock in. It's like you get excited about it, and like you're thinking about it when you're not doing it, right? You're like on vacation, and you're like, oh, this would be a good episode for this or whatever. So it's like, yeah,
100%.
yeah. He basically says how he used to have a job, like working at a Red Lobster, but now he has a career, and he's like, you don't rub that in the face of people that have jobs.
I can absolutely see that.